the past 4 weeks, we've been sharing together the wonderful realization that today, leading scientists in our world are acknowledging that the mind and the brain are not the same thing. That the mind is a separate entity and is responsible clearly for the running of our lives, and that the brain is an instrument of the mind. And so that's a wonderful step forward that we recognize is taking place in our world. It hasn't filtered down through all of science, but there are many of the leading scientists of the world who have very frankly taken that position, and so in time it will become a part of everyday science. The thing that we are sharing in our lessons this Sunday is that it is one thing to say, yes, I have a mind. It's separate from the brain. My mind is eternal and will live forever. And it's another thing to say, and I know how my mind works. Because sometimes that's the thing we feel we know the least about. What's going on? And so, in the past 4 weeks, we have been endeavoring to understand what are the components of our mind, how they work. And we have said that based on Scripture and based, again, on some scientific work that's been done, that we believe that the mind has 12 faculties, 12 ways in which it can use and express in our lives. These 12 can be taken apart and looked at. That's what we've been doing. So far we've taken 8 of these faculties apart and looked at them individually as to how they operate, as if they were operating and able to operate totally independent. But as we go on, I'll remind you, as I have shared before, that these faculties are working all the time, and they always work together. That is, they're always impacting each other. So that while today we're going to look at 2 faculties which I call the faculties of, that's where they are. They are faculties of manifestation, our manifestation faculties. As we look at the manifestation faculties of faith and imagination, we're going to hold them up and look at them as if they were operating all by themselves. But always I want you to remember they're like a collage. They work in conjunction with the other faculties. Very important that we understand that as well. Also to realize that these faculties have always been present. And so when somebody says, I just don't have faith, or when we talked, I think, about order, somebody says, well, I just am not orderly. We all have the capacity for order. We have the capacity for each of these faculties. They're built in. But like everything else, they have to be recognized and they have to be exercised. Isn't that what you told me, voice teacher? She said, I want you to go, because I got to develop my breath. And how many times did you say to do that? 3 times? No. 4 times at a minimum is an exercise. But I have the feeling that the more I could do it, the more I will be able to do it, because it comes through exercise of the muscle. And that's the way it is with every part of our consciousness, or rather of our mind faculties. They have to be exercised. But again, you can't exercise them unless you realize what it is they're supposed to be doing. It's like when I go, I know what I'm doing. I'm exercising my diaphragm and my stomach muscles. So, we're going to look now at faith. Faith is mind's ability to determine what is real, and I put that in quotes. It is our mind's concept of reality. Our mind's concept of reality. If you ask people in general, what's real? They usually will respond by relating to you what they are physically aware of in the experience. Most people's sense of reality is based upon physical judgments and experience. And we find that as we establish these, that we become in bondage to these beliefs, because faith is the capacity to manifest. That which we believe to be real gives mind access to bring it forth into reality in our lives. And again, most of you know this is based on some simple science thoughts that we understand today, that all life is energy. Literally live in a sea of energy. I'm looking at you and I see your bodies, but the truth, if I had the capacity, I would see a whirlwind of energy where every one of you is sitting, because that's all you are in truth. That's not Phil Pierson talking, that's our physicists of today telling us that. And so, because we know we live in a field of energy, we know that this faculty of mind called faith has the capacity to shape and form energy into our lives according to our vision of what is real. We continue, in a sense, in bondage to our own faith until some fool comes along and proves us wrong. And I say that, it's like the whole world lived once in the bondage that the world was flat. And then some foolish sailors came along and said, hey, we've sailed out there as far as you can go, and it just keeps going. And then finally, somebody sailed all the way around the world. But the world lived in bondage to that conviction. It wasn't a major one for most of the world in that capacity, but there are many other belief systems that cause people to live in the faith that such and such is true, until somebody, usually in the field of science and research, comes along and says, that's not true. And suddenly, we're lifted out of bondage, and now we live in another aspect of faith. The story of Moses that we shared some time back, and the exodus from the children of Israel from Egypt, as I said to you, is an allegorical story about the same process. Moses is a representative of faith, who led the children of Israel out of the bondage to the consciousness of the Pharaoh, and the consciousness of the Pharaoh was an extremely limited one. And so this is what our faith has the capacity to do for us, just as Moses did for the children of Israel. It has the capacity to move us out of bondage. All of us have things in our lives that we wish we could change. And today I am reminding you that you have the possibility to change, whatever it is, because you are equipped with this faculty of faith, of your declaration of what is real, what you conceive to be true. Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, spoke of it as perception, but I'm that fool that's come along and said, it's not really perception, it's conception. It is an activity of formulating thought in mind to what is real. When you were born as a little baby, and I know all of you can remember that quite well, you formed a system by using your faith immediately. You perceived what was true around you, and you were told what was true by your parents and by your peers. And then you got educated and went to school, and you also learned what was true. So it's sort of like a round-robin effect, because this is what happens. We learn as infants about these things, and we're taught in the educational system. And I'm about to say, if there's anything true to what I'm telling you, because of what I'm telling you, this means that collectively we constantly build a world based on the faith of the world. You're told by your parents what they've already learned as adults. You're told by your teachers, and then you enter into that collective adulthood consciousness that says, this is what's true of the world. So, if we say there's such and such a disease that cannot be healed, and you've been taught that very carefully, then the energy of our world will reinforce that. And so people will go struggle with that illness and succumb to it until some fool comes along, and I'm using that term, as you know, just to make a point. Really, I should say, some strong expert comes along and says, that's not true at all. Yeah, again, I wish I could grab detail easier from my memory than I can. But just recently, there was an article on St. Jude Hospital, and the man that started it, and he started it on the basis of healing children of something that was a prevalent children's disease at that time, for which assumedly there was something like 80% of children who ever got it passed. And anyway, in his own personal research, he found a way of overcoming that. And then he shared it with the world, and now everybody knows if a child has that, they could be healed. Could they have been healed before? If we knew what this expert had told us, and is now reinforced by everybody, it gets easier and easier to be done. And so, as I say, if you can see that it's like a round-robin effect, you can understand how we constantly rebuild the world and our own personal lives. This activity of faith works in everything and affects everything in life, from common cold to race relationships, to everything in our lives. I had an interesting thing this morning. I was driving down here with my daughter, and my daughter is very astute. She's a psychiatric nurse. Notice she's retired now, but she's a trained psychiatric nurse. And I was saying to her, we were talking about faith faculty, and I said, you know, if people believe this way, they'll get that illness. She said, yeah, but what about this? And so she would come up with a case. Well, obviously, somebody had got, I'll tell you exactly, we were talking about a heart problem. And I was saying people who have trouble with the love faculty, because remember we talked about that love, the faculty of love is related to the heart, have heart problems. And so she astutely reminded me of people who had a heart problem who were extremely loving. And I said, oh yeah. And so then I moved to another example, and said, and of course, if you think this is what happened, she said, yeah, but what about that person? They didn't do that. I said, oh, that's right, that's true. And so I'm making this point to go back to where we began. It's okay to take these faculties and to study them separately, because they are working and they're influencing everything in our lives, but they're impacted all the time by the other 11 faculties. And so while we generalize, I generalize as your teacher, very specifically about the power of faith, we have to understand that we have to be very careful in analyzing our life or somebody else's life strictly by taking one faculty and blaming it all on that particular faculty, because it may be a composite of what's working in our lives. Can you change your faith? Absolutely. Because, as we said earlier, it's just like a muscle. It's a matter of building up in any direction that you want to take it. You can establish your own future. Jesus was always putting the faith faculty up in the forefront of his ministry. This was very essential to his ministry. And though I made a couple directive thought to the fact that you mustn't take these faculties individually and hold them separately. At the same time, we have to realize that it is incredibly important that we know that they do work. And so we can change our life by working on the faith faculty. The energy for the faculty of faith. Love is the heart, as we said. I won't go through all of them again, but the faith faculty is located, by most metaphysicians, in the pineal gland, which is a very central portion of the brain, and has been a portion of the brain almost from the beginning. And we have discovered that in ancient times, there seemed to be a consciousness of this truth, that this was the most focal point of the brain's activity and of consciousness. And how would we know that some of the ancients of Egypt and Greece would know that tremendous truth? How would we know that? They had discovered, no, let me back off of that. They may have gotten it all psychically, because in the earliest days they were far more intuitive than we have tended to be in more modern times. But in more modern times, we know how they would have, how they revealed to us that they knew it by the fact that wherever you looked in their culture, you found that they highlighted the figure of an acorn. The figure of an acorn. So that you find in the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the Greek, the Roman cultures, and the Indonesian, you find examples of the acorn being associated to their gods and their leaders. Even in the headdress, they have acorns. Not naked ladies, but acorns. What would that have to do with faith? Why would they say faith is in the pineal gland? Because the pineal gland looks like an acorn. It looks like an acorn. How many of you have been to the Vatican in Rome? 7 or 8 of you. Did you go to the court of the acorn? No. One went to the court of the acorn. Okay. To go to the Vatican, they have this big court. And the second biggest thing in the court is this huge acorn. What the heck is an acorn doing in the court? You realize that it's important to the faith, the ancient faith of the Catholic Church. Because if you look at the rod that it's called the staff, I guess, the staff that the Pope has, you will find that the head of it is an acorn. What in heaven's name would that be about? Unless it is, again, a reflection of the understanding that this is the very heart of faith, located in your pineal gland. And I love the fact, too, I'm going to jump ahead, and may regret doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to jump ahead to the other part of the dyad, faith and imagination. And when you study the pineal gland, as some of you here have done, you find that it's the gland that affects your ability to sleep, because the pineal gland responds to the fact of darkness, and it releases melatonin. And when you have melatonin, you go to sleep. And what do you do when you sleep? You dream. What do you do with your imagination? You dream. I mean, you paint pictures, right? Can you see the relationship when I say faith and imagination are a working pair and a dyad? They're essential to each other, and they're centered in both, located in the pineal gland. So let me talk about the imagination faculty. I've said that faith is the conceiving faculty of mind, imagination is the perceiving faculty of mind. It is your capacity to imagine with your senses or with consciousness that which is real. So it plays off the faith faculty, which also is conceiving what is real. Imagination is probably everybody's favorite faculty. As I say that and I look at you, I think, no, I'll bet if I said, what's your favorite faculty? Love. Anybody over here want to venture? Yeah. You probably all would have said love, be my guess. But in terms of the plaything what's your favorite plaything that the mind can do? The answer would have been, I'm sure, imagination. And those of you who have been a part of studies of allegories of the Bible, because the great allegories of the Bible, as we've shared before on occasion, they have told the same things that we're talking about today. And the story of Joseph and his brothers, and Jacob, is primarily about imagination. Because when the Bible told you that Joseph was his father was Jacob, and the story tells us that Jacob's favorite son was who? Joseph. And what does Joseph represent? Imagination. How do we know that? Because he had his coat of many colors, and he was always telling the dreams of his brothers and imagining things for them. He saw them bowing down to him, and so clearly he represented imagination. As the story goes on, he continues to have that capacity to dream, and he wins the Pharaoh's favor and all, and he ends up in jail. And then he tells before he became the Pharaoh's favorite, he was in jail, and he told the dreams of some of the prisoners who got out and got the word to the Pharaoh. He said, the prisoner can tell you dreams. And the Pharaoh had a big dream, and nobody could interpret it, so he said, get that guy Joseph. And so Joseph comes, and he interprets the Pharaoh's dream perfectly. That's not the important end of the story, though, because Joseph then becomes the Pharaoh's right-hand man, rules the country. Some people live by imagination, you know. They live in a wonderful fairyland most of the time. They think that life is good. They call them unity students. But anyway, the real key to this story is that when Joseph's brothers came down because they were having famine in their land, and they came to Egypt because, I'm making this a long story, but Joseph had told Pharaoh there's going to be a great famine, and you've got to fill the storehouses with grain in the good fields. And they did that, so they had lots of grain. So when his brothers had no food, Father said, you go down to Egypt and get some grain. So they show up in front of Joseph, Pharaoh's great leader, and told them that they were hungry and needed food. They did not recognize their brother. And he sent them, he gave them what they wanted. He said, but don't come back again unless you bring your youngest brother. Because when Jacob had let the other brothers go down to Egypt to get the food, he had kept his youngest brother at home, his youngest son at home. Because he says, I've already lost my favorite, and I'm not going to lose my youngest son. But our friend Joseph said to his brothers, don't come back for any more food unless you bring Benjamin with you. That was the name of the youngest son. This was a big deal. And so they went back, told their father, they ran out of food again, and they said, we can't go back and get more food unless we take Benjamin. Now, why would that story, other than making it for a movie, which they've made movies of, why would that be in there? You can only understand it if you realize that these characters represent faculties of mind, just like we're talking about now. Joseph represents imagination, and now today you know what Benjamin represents.
Faith.
Faith. Benjamin, the derivative of his name, represents faith. And so the whole story was trying to tell you Joseph and imagination and faith work together. And so Joseph had to have his Benjamin, he got his Benjamin, and it all turned out wonderful. There's one more, quickly tell you one more story just to confirm this about how the Bible was trying to tell us these things. There's a story of Jacob and Laban, and I'll give you the real short version of it. Jacob, who is the father of Joseph, the story I just told you, but earlier, Jacob was trying to win his wife, and his father-in-law said, yeah, you can, but you've got to work for me so many years, and he did. And then when Jacob went back and said, okay, I've worked all these years, now I'm going to take my wife and go. He said, no, you've got to work another period of time. I mean, that just seems downright unfair and cruel, except it's all leading up to what the story was really about. Because he said, you can go, and so then so Jacob worked that extra period of time, and then when he came back again, his father-in-law said, you can go, but you can't take any of the cattle with you, except the ones that are striped and spotted. And so he said, okay. But then the next day, his father-in-law had the other brothers take all the spotted and striped calves and took them away. And so poor Jacob was left with no cattle, except he did something brilliant. As he tended the cattle, had no stripes or spot, he took them to the watering hole, and in the watering hole, he took sticks that were made from poplar and hazel and chestnut trees, and he stripped them and made them to appear as if they had stripes and dots, and put them in the water, right in the back of the watering hole, so that when all the cattle came, they were looking right at those stripes and those dots. I mean, it's another one of the stories. Why do we spend time reading these stories? Except it all had a purpose, because what happened? The cattle started to having offspring that had spots and stripes all over them. How could that have happened? The power of imagination linked with faith brought it forth in the next generation. So, again, the more we learn in terms of what we know scientifically today to be truth, the more we can even understand in some of these stories of the Bible that these people knew intuitively when they were writing these stories and trying to bring us these principles to put into our lives. In winding this up, let me say that I appreciated the conversation that my daughter Elizabeth and I had, that there are exceptions in being able to analyze the way in which things come forth in our lives. But I can guarantee you, absolutely, that when you use the faculty of your imagination and faith, and you exercise it over and over, I perceive and conceive that my life is bringing forth greater good. It is going to come forth in your life. It is the greatest physical shaping power that you have in your life. Let's close our eyes and just give thanks that we are reminded today of these marvelous, marvelous gifts that God has given us. We give thanks that we can conceive that God loves us, as Cherie led us in our prayer time today, as God presence within us, Christ consciousness. It is constantly working for us in love. We believe that. We see that to be true. We affirm it over and over. And we visualize that good coming forth in our lives in wonderful ways, according to God's wisdom. Thank you, God.